What's up, my friend? Abby here, and welcome back to Writer's Life Wednesdays, where we come together to help you make your story matter and make your author dreams come true. Today's video is part 2 of the video that I did last week about writing an amazing, gripping, inciting incident that will grab your reader's attention and pull them into your story. So go watch part 1 if you haven't seen it already. We debunk some of the myths about the inciting incident, just break down what the inciting incident actually is, how to write an amazing, gripping, inciting incident, and I give you guys some prompts, some questions to ask yourselves to get your creative juices flowing about your story, make your story opening the strongest it can possibly be. Today we are doing a case study of the inciting incident with example stories. So usually I do the example story case study thing right within the first video or just all in one video, but I'm trying something a little bit different because the inciting incident is such a big, important topic to cover. I don't have time to do it all in one video. So we're gonna be looking at 2 story examples today. One's a good example, one's a bad example. We're gonna look at what works, what doesn't. Plus, I'm going to show you a story that proves you don't need your inciting incident to be some big, epic, crazy call to adventure. In fact, it can be as simple and seemingly insignificant as the task of cleaning up your backyard.
Why does your story matter? Good question. What if I told you that there's a science behind every great story? I don't just teach you how to write. I teach you how to change the world with your story and make your author dreams come true.
Okay, so even if you did watch that first video, let's recap and refresh our minds about the basic principles of writing an amazing inciting incident. The inciting incident isn't just the first big thing that happens. Rather, it's the external event that pushes your protagonist outside their comfort zone. Knowing the protagonist and understanding her comfort zone is the only thing that makes us see the importance of the inciting incident. Because you've already introduced us to the protagonist's internal conflict in the hook, the reader can now see how this whole situation is going to be especially painful for her to navigate. The impossible choice is what piques our curiosity and keeps us reading. If you don't give your protagonist a choice to make and show us why this choice is so important to them, your protagonist becomes a punching bag for the plot, and your story becomes predictable. Remember, your protagonist's misbelief has been quietly growing stronger for a long time now, which means when something pushes her outside her comfort zone, she's primed to make a decision based on that misbelief. Okay, so now we're going to take these guidelines and case study some real stories. More specifically, Divergent versus The Greatest Showman. If you've been here for a while, you know exactly how I feel about both of these stories, and if you're new around here, this should be a fun little surprise. Let's only look at the inciting incidents of these stories and ask ourselves the same questions that I gave you in last week's video. First, let's case study Divergent. I wish I could just ignore the non-hook hook that just info dumps a ton of world building on us without showing us why any of it matters to the protagonist. But I can't. Because as we talked about in the hook video, those first few moments are not only crucial for grabbing our attention, but they're crucial for showing us, laying out the foundation of who this protagonist is. Their internal conflict, which is the yardstick by which we're going to measure the importance of everything that happens. In Divergent, the book and the movie, we don't really learn anything about our protagonist, Tris. We just learn that she's a girl living in dystopian Chicago where everyone is sorted into factions based on their major personality traits. At the age of 16, everyone has to take a test that will allegedly tell them where they belong in society. No, it's not the Myers-Briggs test, even though that would probably work just as well as this serum-induced mind frick. The inciting incident is when Tris takes the test and gets spooky, inconclusive results, which leads to confusion on the day she has to choose her faction. I have absolutely no problem with that external conflict. It's a little cliche maybe, but that's just your typical dystopian plot. The problem here is not the external conflict, it's the internal conflict, or the lack thereof. What is Tris's internal conflict? What is she afraid of? What does she desire or think will bring her true happiness? What is her misbelief and where did it come from? At one point she says,
I'm scared it'll tell me I'm not abnegation, that I have to leave my family, but I'm even more scared that it'll tell me to stay.
But that only tells me that she doesn't know what she wants. She just knows that
everyone knows where they belong, except for me.
But why is it important for her to fit in? At the beginning of the story, she doesn't even know that divergents are dangerous and therefore get hunted down and killed by Kate Winslet. So she has virtually nothing to be afraid of yet, and apparently nothing to desire. She kinda doesn't want to leave her parents, but shows exactly zero remorse when she makes the decision to defect and never see her parents again. But that's the first plot point, so let's circle back to the inciting incident and ask ourselves the questions from part 1. Why does this inciting incident matter to the protagonist? How does it push her outside her comfort zone? I actually have no idea why it matters to Tris. We don't get to know anything about her internal conflict before she takes the test, which means we're just experiencing these external events as if they're happening to us. Our mirror neurons are firing, but we're not empathizing with her unique struggle. And because there was no comfort zone previously determined, I can't really say how this pushes her outside her comfort zone. We don't know what her comfort zone is, because we don't know what her fear is, or the deeply rooted misbelief that created this fear. What internal conflict is going to arise for the protagonist in wake of the inciting incident? After her test, Tris is perplexed and doesn't tell anyone what happened because she was ordered not to. But this turn of events doesn't raise the stakes or change anything for Tris right now. She still doesn't know what faction to choose and doesn't express much of a desire to be in any of them, save her hint of unexplained attraction to Dauntless. What is the impossible choice? The protagonist must be faced with these options: stay inside their comfort zone and risk never getting what they desire, or venture into the unknown and accomplish their goal while still avoiding their fear. Now here is where most writers would be like, aha, she has to choose what faction she's gonna belong to. There's the choice. And yes, she does. In fact, this choosing ceremony is like the biggest deal ever in dystopian Chicago. But the impossible choice I'm talking about isn't a choice between 5 factions. It's the choice between these 2 options: stay inside my comfort zone and risk never getting what I desire, or venture into the unknown and accomplish my goal while still avoiding my fear. Tris doesn't face this impossible choice simply because we don't know what her comfort zone is, we don't know what her desire or goal is, and we don't know what her fear is, or how it's rooted in her misbelief. See why I stress the importance of getting to know your protagonist first? It's what makes the inciting incident matter, not only to the protagonist, but to you as the reader. Because we don't see Tris's internal conflict at the beginning, the inciting incident is just a thing happening to a random person. It's plot-driven, not character-driven, and it misses the opportunity to grab our attention and make us care about what's happening. The rest of the story unfolds in a predictable sequence of external event after external event, all of them trying to evoke some kind of emotion, but failing, simply because we were never given the measuring tape of internal conflict to show us why what happens to Tris matters to Tris. So now let's move on, shall we, to a much better example of an inciting incident, and that is, of course, The Greatest Showman. Yes, I realize that they rewrote history quite a bit for the sake of this movie, but you have to admit it was a damn good rewrite. The hook wastes no time in showing us what P.T. Barnum wants: to do something spectacular with his life and to be successful. He's a boy with a million dreams, but reality is standing in the way of him being who he wants to be. Reality is, he has nothing. And after years of struggling to make ends meet, he still has nothing, a fact his father-in-law unhelpfully rubs his nose in.
She'll be back. Sooner or later, she'll tire of your life, of having nothing.
Barnum marries his one true love anyway, hoping life will get better and hoping that one day he will be the success he's always wanted to be. The inciting incident steps in when, a few years later, Barnum is laid off along with everyone else in this gloomy looking office. So let's pause here and ask ourselves the same questions about this inciting incident and see what we learn. Why does this inciting incident matter to the protagonist? How does it push him outside his comfort zone? We've already learned about Barnum's desire, fear, and misbelief in the opening of the story. He desires to do something spectacularly successful, but reality and his future father-in-law slaps him in the face and tells him that he will never be anything more than what he is, which is poor, unsuccessful, and, in his eyes, not good enough. That created the fear of failure and poverty, which is based on a misbelief that you are only happy if you're successful, and you're only successful if you are wealthy, popular, and admired by everyone. Getting fired from his job pushes Barnum outside his comfort zone because ultimately he wants to give his family the kind of life he dreams of. Not that he was giving him that kind of life before he got fired, but we can see how dissatisfied he is with his life, and we know why. The comfort zone has been drawn because we know what lies outside his comfort zone. Fear of failure. What internal conflict is going to arise for the protagonist in wake of the inciting incident? Since internal conflict is really desire versus fear, you can probably see Barnum's internal conflict right away. No job means staring his idea of failure in the face, but he still has the burning desire to make his million dreams come true, and no job could also mean the opportunity to try something new. What is the impossible choice? Your protagonist must be faced with these options: stay inside their comfort zone and risk never getting what they desire, or venture into the unknown and accomplish their goal while still avoiding their fear. Barnum could stay inside his comfort zone and not risk greater failure. He could get another depressing job like this one and continue to make ends meet, but that would mean never getting what he desires. His other option is to venture into the unknown and try to accomplish his ultimate goal, but it's risky and he could lose everything. But because the pain of continuing down the same road of barely scraping by is far greater than the pain of potentially losing this gamble with the circus thing, he decides to try the circus thing. Because like we briefly discussed last week, our brain makes decisions based on pain, okay? Avoiding pain, avoiding the greatest pain, pain versus pain. We're gonna dig more into that in next week's video, not next week's, but the week after next week, I think, when we talk about the first plot point. So now, do you see what I mean about making your inciting incident matter to your protagonist and matter to your reader? Before we wrap this case study up, I want to show you one more example. This is for all of my contemporary writers out there. See, when a lot of writers look at the 3-act story structure, at first, it sometimes seems like it is more suited to a fantasy story or a sci-fi, or at least a really adventurous story. In some 3-act story structures, you might even see the inciting incident labeled as the call to adventure, which just conjures all these images of like this big, crazy external event crashing into your protagonist's life to call them to their destiny. But what about when you're writing a contemporary and there's no adventure to be called to? There's nothing adventurous going on. No worries, you can still write a super compelling inciting incident. I'm obsessed with small scale stories for this reason. I love seeing writers take a scenario where nothing seems to be happening, yet you're so drawn into the character's story that you can't look away. One such story like this is the film This Beautiful Fantastic. Oh my gosh, I've been so wanting to use this story as an example for a long time, but I've been refraining from it because I know it's not that well known, which is tragic, by the way, because it's so good. Like, I love everything about this story. Not only is the protagonist super freaking relatable, to me anyway, but the most fascinating thing about this story is how really not much happens. Bella Brown, a reclusive London writer, is obsessed with order and cleanliness, and she hates going outside, mostly because it's not orderly and not clean. As a result, her house is adorable, but her backyard, not so much. Bella's inciting incident shows up when her landlord comes over and tells her that if she doesn't get her yard cleaned up on the double, she's going to be evicted. That's literally the inciting incident. She has to clean up her yard. I freaking love this because it is such a small and seemingly insignificant task that most people don't even think about, but to Bella, it's the most outside her comfort zone thing that could happen to her. And we understand why it freaks her out so much because we first get to know who she is as a person, not with a lot of exposition or explanation, but just by observing her habits and knowing some of her backstory. So no, you don't have to have some crazy epic call to adventure to upend your protagonist's comfort zone. In fact, your inciting incident could be something that most people look at as just a boring everyday task. Okay, boom, that's it for today's case study. Comment below and tell me what are some of your favorite examples of inciting incidents that matter to the characters. Be sure to grab the 3-act story structure template. It is linked in the description box below, and stick around because not next week, but the week after that, we're going to be breaking down the first plot point, okay? So that's the next story beat. And that's going to be when your protagonist makes the impossible choice, which determines what happens next. We're also going to explore how the human brain makes difficult decisions. And if you're from the future, that video will be linked right here. Smash that like button if you liked this video, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos and publishing videos every single Wednesday, and I would love to have you here in the community. Also, Also, be sure to check out my Patreon because that's where we go beyond videos and take storytelling to the next level. The Patreon community is not only the best way to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, but it's also the only way to connect personally with me and get better guidance on your story. So go to patreon.com/AbbyEmmons and check out all the awesome extra content that I've made for you. Until next week, my friend, rock on. In some 3-act story structures, which just conjures all these images of like some mystical force exploding. What? Now we're gonna rip some stories apart. It's my favorite thing to do, maybe even more than writing.